I spoke with a lot of experts that said this is a major sign of weakness, that somebody from their state could not get their delegation to coalesce around him.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by Congressional reporter Samantha-Jo Roth. SJ, we've had some returns to the Senate. There have been a lot of absences, almost like they're vacant seats practically. Not so much anymore. Particularly the return of the man. Talk about who we've seen come back.
Yeah, so Senator Fetterman is back. He was hospitalized. He was battling some depression.
Sure.
So he is back, and that is, a big deal, obviously, for Democrats because they hold such a slim majority in the Senate. We're still missing Senator Dianne Feinstein, and that has been a huge topic over the course of the last week. Obviously, she sits on a very important committee. There's a lot of judicial nominations that are trying to make their way through this committee. Actually, the Senate was able to clear a couple of those controversial ones, but it's the ones that are a little bit more liberal where they just can't get the Republican support, and her absence is really holding things up.
And there's been one important return on the Republican side as well. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, right? So how soon we forget, right?
I know. He said he's had a really funny comment actually at the Senate conference. He was asked by, I think it was CNN, about the Trump indictment, and he said, well, I hit my head, but I didn't hit it that hard. So he is back. That was a huge relief, I think, for a lot of Republicans. They're getting a lot of questions about whether he would be, leaving or not. And, he's someone who has a lot of control of his conference. He's able to get people to rally behind him. And so that was a big deal, obviously, for Republicans. I almost forgot because Senator Thune just did such a good job through the absence.
Yeah, it's too soon to remember that. So one of the first things Senator McConnell did when he was back was he led his caucus in sort of pouring cold water on the idea of replacing Dianne Feinstein on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And procedurally, Lindsey Graham, kind of put the final nail in that. So are Democrats kind of stuck with her now?
Yeah, they're absolutely stuck, and they're in a really impossible situation where, I think a lot of them are treading really lightly. They don't want to seem sexist. They don't want to seem ageist. They don't, that, and obviously Dianne Feinstein is a legend. So I think they're sort of in a bind right now. Originally Senator Schumer had wanted to replace her temporarily with Ben Cardin. But, obviously that is not going to happen. So I think Democrats are sort of in a wait and see mode. I will say that when asked about it, Senator Schumer really was not able to give us a timeline as to when she would come back. She's been missing since March 7th. So that's a long time, especially in the course of these committees. So I think a lot of Democrats are a little anxious, waiting, wanting some kind of actual update. But for now, Senator Schumer keeps kind of repeating the same line that he spoke with her. She wants to come back, but nothing solid.
And there have been some calls on the Democratic side for her resignation, but that's pretty much only been in the House, right?
Yeah, I think Democratic senators have been really careful. A lot of them obviously feel like it's really disrespectful or that they served with her. I mean, you even had Senator Joe Manchin, moderate West Virginia Democrat, who, didn't even like the idea of replacing her temporarily and came out against that. You also saw some interesting dynamics among some of the Republicans on the committee. Senator Susan Collins saying, it's been a long time coming that Democrats were trying to kick her off this committee. So she was not going to, have any part in doing that. So I think that was an interesting point that she was making. We've seen Dianne Feinstein. She was supposed to be head of this committee during the Trump administration. She stepped down from that. She never served as Senate pro tempore, which, obviously that's a huge deal. You're in line for the presidential succession. She, was pressured not to do that as well. So there's been a lot of internal fighting, I think, among Democrats. And I mean, the woman is 89 years old, so
Right.
the oldest senator. So I think people are, watching really closely.
But some pretty old people have gotten to be president pro tem of the Senate, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's been, it was definitely, and it's just been, well, right now it's not, but
Right.
but yes. So it definitely is something notable that she hasn't been able to serve in those positions. But, it's been a very active week on the Senate side, for sure.
But you did get to take a little bit of a break from that and focus on this fight between a couple of Florida men. And so former President Donald Trump seems to be racking up a lot of endorsements from the Republicans in the Florida House delegation. But a lot of people are expecting the current governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, to run for president, probably at the conclusion of the Florida legislative session next month. So what gives here? Why are so many of them flocking to Trump rather than their home state guy?
Well, it's a very complex question, but I think what's going on is the Trump endorsement game is going at full speed ahead. They have been one step ahead of DeSantis at every turn. I mean, I spoke with some members who had told me that they were getting phone calls from Trump's team, not just this past week, for months, asking for endorsements. So, the former president is really on this. He has a list of people. He's watching them very closely to see who is going to endorse him and who is not. One thing that we really have heard is that, Governor DeSantis has a reputation, even when I covered him up here when he was the 6th District Congressman from Florida. He was kind of a lone wolf. He didn't have a lot of allies. He didn't have a lot of friends that he was sponsoring legislation with. And it seems that has really continued. He really hasn't been able to have the retail politicking kind of relationship that he might need with members of Congress. You will definitely hear from some Republicans who say, this stuff doesn't really matter.
Right.
Trump can't win. So
Right.
why are these people, putting their personal politics in the way of that? One of those was Francis Rooney, a former congressman from Florida who retired rather. But you just have this really complex situation where some of these Florida members do not feel like DeSantis is there for them. They haven't been able to get him on the phone. Some of them have been snubbed at events in their own districts.
Right.
And they're upset, and they feel like this is the only way that they're able to send a message to him by not endorsing him. So the big question is, what is that going to do with their relationship moving forward? He's still the
Right.
sitting governor of Florida. They still need his help with, certain things. And if he ends up winning the nomination, will he forgive them?
Right. No, that's right. But a lot of times these endorsements don't necessarily matter as much as they seem, and it's very early. And there are all kinds of arguments for why you could make that this might be overrated. But isn't there maybe something to, if he's having difficulty with his relationships with members of his own party from his own state, and he's going to run against former President Trump, who has a very powerful emotional connection with his base, very effective at rallies and things like that. And President Biden maybe has slowed down a little bit, but is still very good at retail politics. It's what he's known for. Might that be a bit of a disadvantage when you're running against those two gentlemen?
I mean, it definitely could. And I spoke with a lot of experts that said this is a major sign of weakness that somebody from their state could not get their delegation to coalesce around him. So I certainly think
Especially since he was once a member of that delegation.
Absolutely. A lot of these members have served with him. They've been, sponsoring legislation, or, they have similar priorities. So I think that certainly is a slap in the face. You'll see DeSantis camp right now. They're really trying to downplay a lot of this, saying endorsements don't matter. But I mean, I will say that the former president has a very complex operation. He knows what he's doing, and he knew that Governor DeSantis was coming to Washington, D.C., and he worked the phones like no other over the last week, especially after hearing that and we heard this from several of our sources, that an aide for the governor was calling members, trying to get their endorsements, and many of them, quite frankly, were very offended. They were like, I've never heard of you. Why is the governor himself not getting on the phone and calling me?
Especially when Trump himself was working the phones in some cases.
Exactly, and that's exactly what you are hearing from some of these members. I mean, one member told me that he has spoken with the governor maybe once on the phone, and that was because there was a national disaster emergency in his district. But he hasn't been able to get him on the phone, and it seems very transactional. I think that was the quote. And so I think a lot of Florida members are just very offended about that. And there are certainly a couple that are being very quiet. So we'll see, what some of those are ending up doing. Obviously, Florida's 2 Republican senators have not said how they're going to go. So we're just going to have to wait and see with those. But, there's a lot of angst in the Florida delegation and a lot of members that really feel like the governor has done them wrong and has snubbed them.
So maybe by the time the Florida legislative session ends, the governor will have invested in the Friends and Family Plan?
I think that's what some people are hoping. Some are saying too little too late,
Thank you, SJ.
Thank you.
You can read Samantha-Jo and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.